it was Mayor Durkin who
and
vetoed that
Councilmember Sawant,
bill.
it's a fact that we have the longest.
Can I have the clerk mute everybody?
Because
Because apparently people can't behave. Clerk, can you please mute it?
Which I'm still proud to continue to do.
Please mute it. Mute everybody. So, are we all going to take a breath here?
Well, that's the Seattle City Council right there. A whole lot of shouting going on, and the mute button comes out there last week. Yikes. That was an argument over Councilmember Sawant's resolution to support unionization at Starbucks in Seattle. So, what kind of fussing and fighting are we going to hear about this week? Well, we do have the mayor delivering a State of the City address. We'll be talking about that. We also have some changes to mask mandates coming to us at the state level, plus an eviction ban ending in Seattle. All that and so much more to discuss on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And joining me once again from the Seattle Times, it's David Croman. David, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to ask, does seeing the Rams win the Super Bowl make you feel like, way to go, NFC West division, or is it like, oh, not these punks?
Yeah, somebody had mentioned that the Bengals are kind of like the Mariners of the NFL, and
nice, yeah.
That made me want to root for them.
Yeah,
I always like the smaller market teams.
Totally,
you kind of got to root for the smaller market teams.
I know,
so it's not so much that I don't like LA; it's that I was sort of rooting for the
underdog. They darn near pulled that one off. That would have been interesting. Get him next time, Cincy. We'll see what happens there. All right. Thank you, David, and for joining me once again. And thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor there at City Hall. Please do support them, other small businesses as well. Thanks also to our patrons, hoping to get a few more of you on board if you would. And if you pledge at the $10 level, you can hang out with me and David and clink mugs virtually. David, can we do this one more time here? Clink. Yeah, it kind of works like that. Get yourself a Seattle News, Views, and Brews mug. It's a great thing to have, and you can do that at the $10 level. And also, our Mug Club members are always featured on our Mug Shot of the Week. And this week, it's Todd, who uses his mug as a pen and pencil holder. Fair enough. That's what it looks like there, Todd. Thank you very much for sending that in. Thanks for supporting the show. And hey, patrons, send in some more mugshots, please. We would love to feature them on the program here. Also, if you would like to support the show, contact the show, well, check out Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Finally, thanks to Converge Media, the video version of this podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get the party started with right here, right now. Well, David, here we are in the middle of February, and it's time for a State of the City address from our once and present mayor, Bruce Harrell. I know that theme, We Are One Seattle, was very big in Mayor Harrell's inaugural speech last month. He appears to be trying to hit that home again with his speech this week because he will be presenting this in the City Council meeting live, not a recorded presentation, as we saw a few times during the Durkin administration over the past couple years. I just wanted to ask, what are your expectations for this speech, I guess? And also, what is our State of the City right now? What do you think Bruce Harrell's going to highlight?
I think I would expect that we sort of hear a lot of what we've heard from him before, talk about unity and, like, as you mentioned, his kind of One Seattle theme.
Yeah.
State of the City addresses, my experience is people kind of forget about him fairly quickly, but they are an opportunity for, especially a new mayor like Bruce Harrell to kind of lay out his agenda for the first year. He might announce, I don't remember any time when a mayor announced something like really, really big, but they usually announce, new investments or maybe kind of new task forces or,
right.
Kind of the start of something that they want to work towards, that sort of thing. So I would expect that maybe we hear that.
Okay.
But I think he is probably going to talk a lot about. My guess is he'll talk about public safety because he has been talking about public safety. He'll talk about homelessness. He'll probably talk about COVID.
Yeah.
So I have not seen a State of the City to date that has been something I would describe as earth-shattering, but it does sort of give an opportunity sometimes to, at least, especially for a new mayor, to kind of sketch out what we might expect over the next year.
Right. And I did want to point out there's one issue that might reveal a bit of a disconnect between the council and the mayor's office. I wanted to point this out. So Mayor Durkin, close to the end of her term, passed an executive order to hand out signing bonuses to new officers. Now, the city council took that order in, said, well, we're going to amend this. This program will end on December 31st. But Durkin told the police, keep on handing those out. She actually questioned the legality of the council's legislation here, said they needed to respond within 48 hours. A few questions about that one. But I wanted to talk about this, David. When it comes to public safety, the SPD has been hiring people in January. Publicola reporting somewhere between $180,000, $450,000 handed out in terms of bonuses. I guess I wanted to talk about what Mayor Durkin did and what the new administration with Mayor Harrell could do to kind of right that ship and hopefully get on a better page with the city council here.
Yeah, I think that is sort of indicative of how that relationship between Mayor Durkin and the council ended. Which roughly. Is and we saw that a lot. You know, the council would do something and then allocate money to a certain program, and then the mayor would have questions about it and wouldn't spend that money in the way that they wanted, and then vice versa. And so this just is kind of like one more exclamation point on what had been kind of a running theme between the two of them. Yeah. The kind of 48-hour window, but then not kind of coming out and saying that this was happening. It feels all, it's a little semantic in some ways. Yeah. But more broadly, it just kind of reflects a fundamental disconnect between the two of them at the time. Yeah. It's interesting that the Harrell administration is, they've been giving interviews on this, both the Seattle Times and Publicola, and they have been pretty upfront about how that they're concerns
showing
about
documents, etc.
And I say it's interesting because I expect fully that Mayor Harrell would support some kind of continued signing bonus for police officers because he has campaigned and made explicit that he wants to grow the police force. And so, I do think that this is probably an effort on his part to get off on the right foot with this council. They're going to have disagreements about, for example, whether there should be signing bonuses at all. But does seem to be at least some effort to air those disagreements in public and rather than kind of these sort of backdoor fights that seem to be happening between the council
and we'll see what happens there, because I know Councilmember Herbold at the end of last year was saying, hey, that's great. We can talk about bonuses for the SPD, but there's a lot of other frontline workers within city agencies that we might consider bonuses for too. So we'll definitely see how that one plays out. But I wanted to talk about the other big news at the state level this week, David, and that's mask mandates. This is a big one. So on the 18th, the state's mask mandate for outdoor events of 500 plus people will be lifted. I got to say, I didn't really remember that was in place, but that's what's happening on the 18th. And the governor is saying he will talk about a timeline to lift the indoor mask requirement sometime this week. So, David, I got to think the whole state is glued to the governor's office right now to try to figure out what's next on this, because we got California saying, okay, end of February, we're ending the indoor mask mandate. Oregon, end of March, we're ending it. What do you think Governor Inslee is going to say about ending the indoor mask mandate in Washington?
I will agree with you that I think the outdoor large event mask mandate, I'm not sure ending that means all that much. I mean, if you had seen a Seahawks game or a Mariners game or something, most of the crowd kind of had their mask around their chin or whatever.
At best, Yeah,
exactly. I mean, he said last week he would likely give a date for when the mandate will end this week. Nothing in the sort of data around cases has changed fundamentally since he said that, and in fact, the trend of downward cases seems to be kind of continuing, and so I would expect that he will deliver a date on when the mask mandate will end. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what could change between now and then. Disrupt that announcement. I guess the question is how far out he's looking. He didn't say he will end the mandate this week. He said he would give a date for when the mandate will end.
Important.
So that'll be interesting. I mean, I think I've made this point before, but I think that the area that stands to kind of be the most affected one way or the other is, in my calculation, probably schools. Because if you go to bars and you go to restaurants these days, kind of similar with the outdoor mask mandate, people wear their masks when they walk in the door, maybe when they're walking to their table, but then basically you've got a whole restaurant and bar full of people eating and
Without
drinking
masks. That's right.
without masks. So in some ways, but schools, I do think, I don't have kids myself, but my understanding is that schools, that's been kind of, that's been tough in some ways.
Yeah, and let me jump in here because that has been strict. I've definitely noticed it with my kids for sure. But it's interesting because the superintendent of public schools, Chris Rakedahl, has inserted himself into this conversation saying, okay, you know what? We should probably let these individual districts decide what they should do with this. And I think that's very interesting because I just wonder what happens. And maybe it's going to be a deal at the state level. They're saying something, but maybe King County Public Health says, well, we need to kind of tweak this or tweak that. I'm interested to see how this is going to play out statewide because I think there's this push potentially for some local control over this.
Yeah, I'm also interested. That's interesting in some ways because Governor Inslee, and we heard him say this again last week, has sort of, at least in I would say in the last year, has kind of tried to avoid patchwork responses to the virus across the state, to the frustration of some in parts of the state where the virus is not as present.
Certainly state Republicans. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And so, it would be interesting if the school side of this became that kind of patchwork. I don't know. I'd be interested to see what schools decided to keep it and what didn't. And we did see a little bit of a break. It appeared to be a break between Chris Rakedahl and Governor Inslee last week because Chris Rakedahl had come out and it appeared to kind of call for a more, expedient end to the mask mandate for schools.
Yes. Yeah. True.
Governor Inslee kind of played down that disagreement in the press conference, but
it's there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because, Chris Rakedahl is elected independently of Jay Inslee, so he doesn't have to do exactly what Jay Inslee wants him to do.
Right.
But yeah, the patchwork approach would, I think, I'd be curious to see how that plays out and how the teachers unions in each area kind of push for which kinds of protections.
Right. A lot of different safety measures I know talked about here in Seattle, but I know a lot of people have been pushing for this mask mandate to end. It's difficult for kids to deal with, certainly difficult for adults too. So we're going to keep an eye on that, folks. But I did want to talk about something up next. Seattle's eviction moratorium is ending in just a matter of weeks. We're going to talk about it coming up on Now Hear This. Well, in case you missed it, folks, a pretty big story that Mayor Harrell dropped in right during that Friday afternoon lull in the news cycle there. He's going to extend the city's eviction moratorium a seventh and final time, 2 more weeks, and have it end at the end of February. So what's that going to do for renters and landlords? What's the impact going to be? I spoke about this last month with Edmund Witter. He's the managing attorney of the King County Bar Association's Housing Justice Project, working a lot with different renters who have these different issues with paying their rent. I asked him what would happen to renters in our area if the eviction ban was lifted in mid-February, as was the situation up until just a few days ago here. And here's what he said.
Unfortunately, it'll be a lot of evictions, despite the fact that we have potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to prevent them. It just takes a few thousand extra people on top of the 11,000 of homeless individuals we have in King County to really just have to create a problem that's bad, even worse. And so unfortunately, if that moratorium is lifted, it's just going to exacerbate our homelessness crisis here.
Well, some dire predictions there from the King County Bar Association, which has been coordinating a lot of the federal funds going out to renters and landlords. David, I wanted to make sure we talked about this because Mayor Harrell is also directing the city's Office of Housing to distribute $25 million to renters and small landlords, in addition to what King County is doing. So I just kind of want to figure out what you think is going to happen when this eviction ban lifts in Seattle. I wonder if the city is somehow going to be able to do a better job than the county in terms of distributing money, because that's been a big issue at the King County level here. But what do you think happens when this eviction ban gets lifted?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think, as you just mentioned, it really does depend on how well they can get this money out the door. Yeah. Because they're, at least early on, there was a lot of money available, and the big problem was just the county in particular was having a really hard time getting it to people who need it. Now the county is saying that they're actually starting to run out of that money despite the need.
And they're asking for more. Yeah, keep going.
And exactly. And so, $25 million, that could make a big difference. But, I was interested to see, Mayor Harrell talking about building out a website and a dashboard, and that's a lot do.
Yeah. In the span of 2 weeks, you bet.
Right. And so I guess it depends. I mean, there are avenues the city could take to kind of get this money out quickly, working directly with affordable housing providers, or, in particular kind of, and then also working directly with like large landlords. The county had a lot more luck because you can streamline this through larger organizations, but that doesn't really help folks who maybe live in duplexes or, fourplexes or things like that, who might not be housed through an affordable housing provider, might not have a large corporate landlord. Those are the kind of people who I would think would probably be at the most risk, because their access to these funds is that they have to take a lot more initiative to do it than maybe if they're housed through an organization. So I don't know what the impacts will be. But it really does, I think, just come down to how quickly can they get this money out.
Yep. And it's interesting you bring up that point about taking initiative, because it's important to point out, folks, that there are other protections for renters in Seattle, even when this eviction moratorium is done. At it was the middle of 2020, the council worked on this bill to give tenants a defense against rent-related evictions. That's specific there. If there was a problem, I can't pay my rent because I don't have enough money because my job's been affected by the pandemic, that is a defense that actually tenants can use in eviction court. But it's just accessing that eviction court process, David, that I think is going to be a challenge for a lot of people. It isn't something that's very easy to do. I know the city's also trying to reach out and make sure there's legal representation for people involved with this, but I think we're moving into a phase now where we're really going to see that eviction court system tested here as we move forward in springtime.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you'd mentioned the kind of right to legal defense.
Yes.
For tenants, that Seattle and the state also kind of passed a version of that. Yeah. And I think, when you talk to folks, that is helpful on the one hand, and even landlord groups aren't really opposed to that, because they, for the most part, kind of just want to figure out a plan going forward. But really the problem is, and Edmund Witter has spoken about this before, is I don't remember exactly the number, but it's less than half of people are actually coming forward and going through the court defense system.
You got it.
And reaching out to them to get help in eviction court. So, it's one thing to guarantee legal counsel to people, but the effectiveness of that is greatly diminished if people don't know about it or don't know how to access it. And that seems to be the case for most folks facing eviction.
Yeah, I think about programs like the city has had utility bill help in place for decades, as a matter of fact, in terms of how money is distributed to people who are in need. It's one of those programs that just doesn't get used as much as it should. A lot of people in need out there, but not as many people access the program. So I'm going to be very interested in this too. I think it's going to be a real test of that system. And in terms of what happens next, we have heard from a few different groups on this, including the Washington Multifamily Housing Association. They're saying, hey, when Washington statewide eviction moratorium ended in October of last year, we didn't see this massive evictions. They're trying to remain bullish on what happens here in Seattle, but we're talking about a lot of people behind on rent here, thousands of people, as a matter of fact. I think that King County had some numbers just looking at this as of last month, looking at this. How many did they have? 124,000 households, more than 12% of all renters in the Seattle metro area are behind on rent, and that's a big deal. So we're going to track down what happens there. But I wanted to move on to a transportation story, Mr. Transportation Reporter, if I could. It's an important part of what the City Council is doing this week in its Transportation Committee, talking about the draft environmental impact statement for Sound Transit for its projects to expand out to Ballard and West Seattle. And let the comments begin. The public comment period just started up for this project. That comment period wraps up on April 28th. Make sure you contact Sound Transit if you want to about this. A lot to take in here. A few issues, David, I'm expecting the council to talk about this week. And I want to start with, what's it going to look like for Sound Transit to go through the Chinatown ID neighborhood? I know there's no preferred alternative here yet, as they call it, but we talked about this a few weeks ago. Is Sound Transit really going to consider a tunnel 190 feet below the surface, as they've talked about, to make this work? And how do they pay for it? Those are two big questions I have.
Yeah, and as we talked about, this is kind of a tough thing, because the kind of best practices these days, especially evangelized by folks in Europe is rather than doing these really deep tunnels that are expensive and have a have a tendency to get delayed and things like that.
Right.
They advocate for cut and cover tunnels. So you dig a big trench and then put a top over it.
Right.
The problem with that, I mean, as has been argued, is that that could be really disruptive to the community. And I think especially right now and with the pandemic and public safety issues in Chinatown International District, some hesitancy to do anything that would be even more disruptive to Chinatown International District. And so, but then, you want people to use the system. And if it takes 6 minutes
to go down in an elevator just to get to the train, right?
I mean, that could discourage people from using it. And so, I mean, it's a tough question. And, and it's a similar one. I mean, part of this too with, is the expansion to West Seattle. There's kind of a similar conversation around, what the route to West Seattle looks like. That though is sort of more, is less a debate about kind of equity as maybe the Chinatown International District one is, and more kind of a, in some ways to boil it down in the most crass terms, like a kind of NIMBYism versus urbanism argument, which is a lot of folks in West Seattle don't really want something like an elevated train track going through their neighborhood, and has we have heard people coming in making public comment about we don't want to see this train, and maybe they have perfectly good reasons for that, but it has been sort of cast as obstructionism by those who want a cheaper and faster route to West Seattle, which the cheaper and faster way to do that would be an elevated track out there. So at the end of the day, this kind of gets at the difficulty of putting in a large and expansive transit system into a city that is already well established. In some ways, you think back to the forward thrust levy and the 1970s or whenever it was, and how much maybe easier it would have been to build this thing out before so many people lived here.
Before Atlanta got our system, I always I really love Atlanta for a lot of reasons, but that's not one of them. Yeah, that's it's tough, and I think you're bringing up a really good point here, David. This whole idea, and I live in West Seattle, and I hear about this stuff all the time. Definitely a few pieces of equity issues in terms of how does this go through the Delridge neighborhood as opposed to people up on the hill by the West Seattle Junction or whatever else? There's some talk about that, but I think you're getting to the root of it, which is dollars and cents. And looking at this environmental impact statement, this is the big deal. They're saying, what we basically approved here is something that would cost about this much, and that would probably include these elevated tracks or whatever else. If you want to do something like subterranean tunnels or whatever else, that's great, but that's going to cost more, and there will have to be some sort of third-party mechanism to bring extra dollars in. And that's where I take a step back and say, how are we going to do that? Is that going to be some sort of tax levied by the city of Seattle? Do you try to do that on a regional level and try to sell that? This is the very difficult part of it when you talk about making these things like tunnels that can be a lot more expensive.
Yep. And, and Sound Transit has it's the transit taxes in the Sound Transit region are some of the highest in the country, specifically for transit. Might be the highest in the country, actually. And so, and I mean, I think eventually, who knows the timeline on it? I think eventually we would start to hear talk about a Sound Transit 4. And so the question is, do you kind of, do they want to use their gunpowder on more funding for a tunnel that's part of Sound Transit 3? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. That's going to be a really, really interesting discussion here going forward. So anyway, folks, get in your comments to Sound Transit. April 28th is the deadline. A lot more ahead on that story for sure. All right. Well, another transit story to bring your way with some trouble attached to it. A spike in the amount of reports of people smoking various drugs on Seattle Metro buses. How's that affecting riders and drivers? It's time for Transportation Talk. David, I noticed a story by your colleague, Mike Lindblom, recently about a spike in reports of people smoking drugs on Metro buses. So transit workers, and I'm pulling from his article here, filed 44 incident reports in 2019 about drug use, 73 the next year, and then an unprecedented 398 reports last year. that sounds serious, and it sounds like it's also really impacting drivers and riders, and I guess I would say the entire system, the transit system.
Yeah, it is, and the union. It's gotten to the point where the union is making a big deal out of this, and raising this concern. It's hard to say exactly what's behind it. I mean, I think people could have some hunches, and then Mike put at the top. It's hard to know exactly if this is translating directly from hard numbers or if this is increased reports. But at the end of the day, I think it gets at one of the kind of most intractable problems that we're dealing with as a region right now, which is, fentanyl is everywhere, and it's cheap and easy to get. We have a lot of folks who are struggling with homelessness, and buses these days especially are one of the few places that have stayed open through this whole pandemic, while services and places that might have otherwise kind of reached out and made more contact with these folks, a lot of them closed their doors and lost a lot of relationships and connections with people. And so, again, it seems that this is kind of falls into that category of problems that we knew were real and existed, and that the pandemic has kind of made likely made kind of clearer and brought into focus more.
Yeah, and it really, I think it impacts this whole idea of people coming back to transit, being something that's inviting where people want to bring it back. And I get it from what the union's saying here as well, but if we are going to really open these buses, have people on them, etc., there has to be something done here, I think, is what I'm hearing from the drivers in the union. Yeah,
and right, exactly. That if because ridership is still down, quite a bit, and so if we want people to return to the buses, how do we make them a place where people feel comfortable and safe being on them? And I think this report from Mike is both concerning for the drivers, but then also probably concerning for people thinking about returning to using public transit regularly.
Right. Yeah, so if you bring the people back to use transit, maybe that's going to help. I noticed Mike called it kind of a chicken and egg type of argument there, and I get it. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how Metro Transit King County Metro really tries to right itself. And I should point out that the King County Council is discussing this week on Tuesday. Rod Dembowski calling a meeting there. Sounds like the union's going to weigh in, and a few other folks. So a lot happening with this issue. And thanks, David, for breaking down that piece, and thanks, Mike, for writing it too. But it is time to finish up the show here, David. And I've been following your tweets like I try to do religiously every week. And I noticed that you and I...
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's always good stuff, man. You and I share a terrible first world problem. How did that song end up on my Spotify playlist? Tell me your tale of woe. What happened here, man?
Well, I don't know. I just was I was out doing some yard work yesterday, and I had been listening to Spotify. And then you know how when an album ends, Spotify kind of takes over and starts playing random stuff. And Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young popped up. And I don't know. I guess I thought that Neil Young and some of his former bandmates had pulled their music from Spotify in protest of Joe Rogan. Turns out that there's some nuances around rights to certain songs, and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young apparently does not fall under the category of music that Neil Young has the authority to actually pull from Spotify. But it did sort of surprise me.
It's not that you're not a fan of the music. I think I see where you're going here. Okay.
Well, yeah, I don't mind Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. I would not say that they are my favorite, though. I like Neil Young.
Easy to rake to, though, right?
That's true. I like Neil Young as a solo artist better than I like them as a group.
All right.
So I would have, but it just surprised me.
Yeah, no, it's like Spotify. Why are you controlling my life like this? But a story for another time, probably. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me on the show here. Thanks to everybody out there listening. Thanks especially to our patrons. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, or if you listen on Spotify, thank you, or wherever you might listen. Again, please do support our show on Patreon. Always appreciate it. Thanks for watching on Converge 2. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.